On a red-eye flight from New York to London, the cabin lights were dim and most passengers were already drifting into restless sleep. But in seat 4A, a young woman sat awake, clutching a sleeping baby against her chest. Her clothes were simple, her face pale with exhaustion, and her eyes betrayed the weight of someone who had carried far too many burdens for far too long. She rocked her baby gently, whispering little prayers, not realizing that the stranger beside her, dressed in a crisp tailored suit with the cool confidence of someone used to being obeyed, was watching. The man was Alexander Grant, a billionaire CEO whose name flashed across magazines, the kind of man people whispered about in boardrooms. He was flying first class, yet his expression was as cold as the ice in his untouched glass of whiskey. He had long since stopped believing in human connection. His world was built on contracts, negotiations, and power plays. But that night, as the turbulence shook the plane ever so slightly, he felt a small weight fall against his shoulder. The young woman, too tired to fight her exhaustion, had dozed off. Her head rested on him, her baby tucked safely in her arms. For a moment, he stiffened, instinctively ready to shrug her off. But then he looked closer. Her hair was messy, strands sticking to her forehead. Her lips murmured in her sleep, as if apologizing to a world that never gave her rest. And that baby, so peaceful, so innocent, clutched at her with tiny fingers, trusting her completely. Something stirred in Alexander, something he hadn't felt in years. He didn't move. He let her sleep. Hours passed. The flight attendant stopped by, offering a blanket, but it was Alexander who quietly draped it over the mother and child. He didn't know why, but the act felt strangely grounding, as if it reminded him he was still human beneath all the armor of success. When the woman finally woke, she jolted upright in embarrassment, realizing she had been leaning against him. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she whispered, blushing furiously. "I didn't mean to." Alexander shook his head. "Don't apologize," he said simply, his voice softer than he intended. But then her eyes fell on something that made her freeze. Resting on her lap, beneath her baby's tiny hand, was a folded piece of paper. She opened it with trembling fingers. It wasn't just paper, it was a check for $50,000. And scribbled beneath his signature were 4 words that would change her life for a fresh start. Her lips parted, stunned. I can't accept this," she stammered. "Why would you? You don't even know me." Alexander met her gaze, and for the first time in years, he allowed someone to see the loneliness hidden in his eyes. "Because I've been given everything money can buy," he said slowly. "And yet, I've never been given what you have. That baby, that love. You don't need to repay me. Just don't give up." Tears welled up in her eyes. No one had ever looked at her that way before, not with pity, but with respect. She wanted to refuse, but the truth was undeniable. She was barely surviving, working 2 jobs, sleeping in shelters, trying desperately to provide for her child. This wasn't just money. It was hope. The plane landed, and as passengers gathered their belongings, Alexander stood and slipped away quietly, not waiting for thanks, not wanting recognition. But as she held her baby tighter, the young woman knew she would never forget the stranger who reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. Weeks later, as she settled into a small apartment she could now afford, enrolled in night classes, and bought a crib for her child, she thought often of him. And though she would probably never see him again, she carried his words like a promise, "Don't give up." And somewhere, in his towering office overlooking the city, Alexander found himself smiling for the first time in years, not because of another business deal, but because for once he had invested in something far greater: humanity. Closing message: sometimes the smallest acts of kindness ripple into lifetimes of change. You never know how much your compassion can mean to someone fighting a silent battle. And sometimes it's in giving away a piece of yourself that you discover the parts of you that were lost. The cabin is dark, the hum of the engine steady. A baby's soft whimper cuts through the silence. The young mother bounces her child gently, her eyes heavy, her body worn out. She hasn't slept in days. The world has not been kind to her, but tonight, fate has placed her in seat 4A, and right beside her sits a man who could change her life. At first glance, he looks untouchable. A sharp suit, a stern jawline, a name that commands boardrooms. Alexander Grant, the billionaire CEO who could buy almost anything in the world. Almost. Because tonight he notices something he cannot buy. The mother's head slowly drifts until, without realizing it, she rests on his shoulder. Alexander stiffens. He hasn't let anyone close in years. His life is schedules, numbers, empires. But now there's a tiny baby sleeping in her arms, and her warmth against his shoulder feels human. He doesn't move. He lets her rest. Minutes turn to hours. A flight attendant approaches. Alexander raises a hand, quietly asking for a blanket, not for himself, but for her. He tucks it gently around her and the baby, as if protecting something fragile he didn't know he cared about. And when she wakes, her eyes widen in panic. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she whispers. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you." Alexander shakes his head, voice low. "Don't apologize." But then she sees it. A folded paper on her lap. Her hands tremble as she opens it, and her heart stops. It's a check. $50,000. Scrawled beneath the signature are 4 simple words: "For a fresh start." Her breath catches. I can't take this. Why would you? You don't even know me." He looks at her, and for the first time, the mask of a billionaire slips. "Because I've had everything money can buy," he says softly, "but never what you have. Love. A reason to fight. Don't pay me back. Just don't give up." Her eyes fill with tears. In a world that had only shown her hardship, here was a stranger who saw her worth. When the plane lands, she looks around for him. But Alexander Grant is gone. No business card, no phone number, no trace. Weeks later, her life is different. She rents a small apartment. She buys a crib. She starts classes at night. Every time she rocks her baby to sleep, she whispers those 4 words like a prayer: "Don't give up." And in a glass tower high above the city, Alexander Grant signs another deal. But this time, when he looks out at the skyline, he smiles. Not for his wealth, not for his empire, but because he finally invested in something greater than money. He invested in humanity. A closing narration for YouTube. Sometimes the greatest wealth is not in what you keep, but in what you give. A kind word, a small gesture, or a helping hand, it may feel ordinary to you, but it can be life-changing for someone else. Remember this: the smallest act of compassion can ripple through generations. This structure, with dramatic pauses and emotional beats, easily fits 10-12 minutes spoken aloud. The cabin was silent, except for the low hum of the engines. A young woman cradled her baby in her arms. Her eyes were heavy, her body exhausted, but she kept rocking him, whispering lullabies as if the world outside didn't exist. What she didn't know was that her life was about to change forever. Because sitting right next to her was a billionaire CEO. Shahawat 25 who har set up the contrast. He looked untouchable. Tailored suit. Perfect posture. A man who belonged in skyscrapers, not airplanes. Alexander Grant. His name alone carried weight in boardrooms. And yet, he sat still, glancing sideways at this fragile scene, a tired mother, clutching her baby like he was her entire world. For a moment, he thought about turning away. But then her head gently dropped onto his shoulder, and the billionaire who commanded empires froze. He hadn't let anyone close in years. But tonight he didn't move. How 200 to 400 humanity awakens. The baby's tiny fingers twitched. The young mother shifted, murmuring softly in her sleep, apologizing even in her dreams. Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in years: humanity, warmth. The flight attendant walked by. He lifted a hand. "A blanket," he said, but when it came, he didn't use it. He tucked it gently around the mother and child, protecting them. For the next few hours, the billionaire didn't close his eyes. He just sat there, staring out into the night, wondering why this stranger had stirred something inside him. 2:06 few uttered the awakening. Morning light spilled through the windows as the plane descended. The young mother stirred, her eyes snapping open. She gasped, realizing she had fallen asleep on him. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she whispered, face flushed with embarrassment. Alexander simply shook his head. "Don't apologize." But then she noticed it. Something resting on her lap. A folded piece of paper. Her heart pounded as she opened it. It wasn't just paper. It was a check. $50,000. And beneath his signature, 4 words: "For a fresh start." Co 6,080. The emotional climax, tears filled her eyes. I can't accept this. Why would you? You don't even know me." Alexander met her gaze. His voice was low. "Because I've been given everything money can buy, but never what you have. Love. Don't repay me. Just don't give up." She wanted to protest, but she couldn't, because in that moment, she knew this wasn't just money. It was hope, a chance at life. The plane landed. Passengers stood gathering bags. She turned to thank him. But Alexander Grant was gone. Hody Hazard Auto 9 to 30, the transformation. Weeks later, her life looked different. She had an apartment now, a crib for her baby, a little fridge with food. She enrolled in night classes. Every time she held her son, she whispered those words like a sacred promise. Don't give up. TO 9 and 30, 1100, the silent victory. Meanwhile, in a towering glass office overlooking the city, Alexander Grant signed another deal. But this time, when he leaned back in his chair, something unusual happened. He smiled, not because of the money, not because of the empire he built, but because for once, he had invested in something far greater than wealth. He had invested in humanity. 1100, 1200, closing message. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is not money, but hope. Not recognition, but compassion. The world doesn't always need another billionaire. It needs more kindness. More people willing to say, don't give up, because you never know. The smallest act of compassion can ripple through generations. End screen message for YouTube. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything. This script, with pauses, emotion, and pacing, will easily reach 10-12 minutes narration length when read slowly with dramatic beats.